We're talking about the StarMetro Transit Development Plan and the Comprehensive Operations Analysis. So we have two projects going on simultaneously right now. And what we're going to do today is give you an update on both of those projects, dive a little deeper into the Transit Development Plan alternatives, what we're looking in the 10-year kind of forecast for projects that we're looking to implement at StarMetro, and then a review of how to keep staying involved with us. And then, like I said, those optional breakout conversations where you can hang back and ask us any questions, help, if you have comments you want to give us, whatever. It gives you that opportunity to just kind of chat with us informally at the end. A refresher for those who are with us before, and maybe new information for those who haven't been. We're talking about two projects. The Transit Development Plan is at the top and the Comprehensive Operations Analysis is at the bottom. So the TDP is this kind of longer look. It's a 10-year planning time frame. So we'll be thinking about recommendations for StarMetro that last out 10 years from now. The COA is more of a short-term sort of project. It's more in the 2-year time frame. So we'll be looking at recommendations that would take effect in the next couple of years. The Transit Development Plan focuses on the entire operations of StarMetro. So it looks at services such as what days of the week does service offer? How late in the evening does it go? It looks at infrastructure, things like CK Steel Plaza, the transit center. It looks at technology, how are we using real-time information and you're paying with your fares on your app or something. And then planning and policy, just kind of policies related to how much fare policy, how much you charge to ride the bus or something. And then you've got the COA, which really only focuses on services. So it's those, how long does the service run at night? What time of day, those sorts of questions. So the TDP is required by state statute and is due September 1 of this year. And then the COA, it's not required. It's really kind of an extra thing that StarMetro is doing. It's not a requirement. And so we're going to try to wrap that up around the end of this year. So that's kind of the overview. I do want to stress one thing about the TDP and this. When we make these and we talk about the recommendations later, this isn't obligating any funds to do these projects. That comes later. The city commission has to put money toward the projects in the budgeting process, but it does give them a plan, a blueprint, if you will, for these projects. So just wanted to clarify that this evening. And so with that, we're going to jump into our first poll. Courtney?
All right, so thank you all for joining us tonight. I do recognize some of the names and the attendees here. The first question is hopefully pretty easy, asking if you attended our last public meeting on this project, which was held on February 17th earlier this year. And the options there, yes, no, or cannot recall. All answers are correct, so you can't fail this quiz. And it looks like we are good to go, Chris. We've got 57%, 4 of you did join us for that February meeting. So you'll be able to hear an update on the progress. And then we do have 3 new folks joining us. Laura?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. And I should note we had a meeting earlier today, so we will take all of the information that we get from both meetings and combine them when we're looking at our recommendations for the TDP. So just keep that in mind. We did have another group participating. So for our update on where we are with the TDP and COA, it's kind of been a lot going on. So we're going to quickly give you an overview of that. We've done a lot of outreach. So we did our public meeting, as we mentioned earlier, in February. So we had a couple rounds there. We did stakeholder interviews as well. And so that's where we kind of meet either one-on-one with someone from another agency or in small groups, or maybe even present to their board. There are different formats, but we're trying to connect with other agencies in the community. So that could be the Florida Department of Transportation, the Lighthouse for the Blind, Elder Care Services, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region, which is the Capital Region Transportation Planning Agency. So all of these different agencies, we've gone around and we've met with about 20 or so of those to get their thoughts about how StarMetro is playing in the community. And then, of course, we had on the website the Design Your System tool, which was kind of a little game to play that helps us understand how the community would prioritize projects in the future. So with that, let's talk about what we heard in these conversations. Good news is we heard a lot of positivity around the services that StarMetro is providing. Generally, we heard a lot of that folks, the services were well received, and that's really great news. I do a lot of work with different transit agencies, and so it's great to see that StarMetro is such a well-received member of the community, and that's not always the case, so it's great to see. The stakeholders indicated that StarMetro is a valued partner, that they feel that they can pick up the phone, call StarMetro, and help their constituents get the services they need. So that's great to hear as well, that it's working very well throughout the community. We heard a lot about improving the current services out there, things like having more frequency and longer hours of service, et cetera. So we heard more about improving what you do have already, as opposed to moving the services out into areas where they aren't currently operating, or maybe expanding services. And then we heard a lot about just generally increasing the visibility and marketing of the system, making folks more aware of StarMetro and its great services throughout the community. So those were kind of big picture items that we heard. We have a lot of detail behind that, of course, as well. And then just looking at the design your own transit system kind of game that we had on the website, we've got over 250 responses at this point, and you can see the kind of rank order of where people were prioritizing investment on the system. So those stop amenities were at the top of the list with folks. And those were the amenities like benches and shelters that help make you more comfortable while you're waiting for the bus. Then there was real-time travel info, which helps you understand where the bus is. They did note expanding service into other areas, increasing frequency on services, smart fare payments, longer weekday service, et cetera. So lots of great things there. I did want to note that there is still time to take this quiz. So if you haven't done it, please go to starmetrothinktransit.com. We're going to have it open for a couple more days so you can fill it out. Also, if you've got friends, family, coworkers, anyone can do it. We'd love to get more input. So please take advantage of that over the next couple days. And then kind of moving away from what we've heard already, we did some work with the staff at StarMetro and developing some goals for the transit development plan. And so we started with the city's goals and really looked at how we could work with those same goals, kind of mirror those goals with StarMetro. And there's a lot of detail behind these kind of 7 big picture ideas and goals. But so we've got objectives and measures and strategies, et cetera, behind all of these. But these are the big categories. So when we're thinking about StarMetro and the services it can provide in the future under the TDP, we're thinking about things like economic development. How can StarMetro support economic development in Tallahassee? And so, that's things like getting people to and from work, helping employers make sure that their employees are getting to work. And then in another goal, it's how can we impact poverty? And so StarMetro is a very affordable service. So that really helps those folks with lower incomes get around the community. We looked at organizational effectiveness. So we're going to be thinking about things that make StarMetro more efficient. How can we support public infrastructure, public safety, public trust? I know public trust is a big one with StarMetro, just making sure that we have a great relationship with our community members. And then improving quality of life generally across the city. So these are those big 7 big picture goals that we're going to be working toward and thinking about as we develop and move forward with the recommendations in the TDP. And so now I'm going to switch gears and talk about some of the data that we've been analyzing behind the scenes. There's been a tremendous amount of data analysis occurring. And so this is one example of that. This is a transit propensity analysis. It's helping us understand where individuals in the community live who are more likely to use transit services. So I like to think of it, if I owned a coffee shop, right, I would do some data and analysis and research to understand where people who like to spend time and money in coffee shops are living in Tallahassee, and I would put my coffee shop there. So this is kind of that same idea, but for the transit agency. Where are those folks who are more likely to use transit? And this is a fairly complicated analysis based on a lot of research and study of individuals, but it looks at and kind of combines a number of different facets of individuals to come up with this analysis, including population density, race and ethnicity, low income status, household vehicle availability, that's how many vehicles are in your household, and then whether or not you were born in the United States. And so it takes all of that and looks for areas where folks are more likely to ride transit are living. And so on the map on the right, the areas that are green and darker green indicate higher and higher percentages of individuals live in those areas that are more likely to ride transit. So the green is more likely to ride transit. And then as you get to the yellow and darker yellow, those individuals are less likely to use transit. And so when you're looking at the city of Tallahassee, you can see that that southwest quadrant is really where a significant proportion of the individuals are living who are more likely to take transit, which is great. There's a kind of concentration that we can focus on. And then you can see kind of, if you look to the northeast, there are fewer and fewer individuals who are likely to take transit. So it's just one tool to help us understand the community, but I think it's a very nice visual to help people look at our community. And so the next item we're going to look at is just how well we're serving the population and with the current services. So on the right is a map, again, of the city of Tallahassee, and the orangey yellow routes are higher frequency service, meaning the bus comes by the same bus stop more frequently throughout the course of the hour. And then the bluer routes have longer time periods between buses, and so they have less frequent service. So we think of the goldish yellowish color as being a higher level of service in those areas. So it just gives us an idea of kind of the distribution of those services across the city. So like I said, we've done a lot of this data analysis, and there's a lot more behind this, but just wanted to share a couple of those examples with you so you know that we were working hard on that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to move into the alternatives. And so with the Transit Development Plan, the TDP, we're going to make some recommendations at the end of this process for a 10-year plan, where we're going to recommend implementing certain services, infrastructure improvements, et cetera, along that 10 years. And so what we did in the very beginning of our process, when you joined us at our first meeting, if you were able to, we were looking at a very broad and large universe of possible potential alternatives. And we've begun to narrow that down based on what we heard. And so we're bringing back some alternatives that we believe that, you know, from what we heard and from what we've analyzed and talking to staff, we believe that they make sense for StarMetro. And so what we want to do tonight is get more feedback from you. Are we hearing what you said correctly? Are we prioritizing them in a way that you think their importance, how important they are, et cetera? So that's kind of where we're going to focus today, is on that narrowed down set of alternatives, so that we can then take that information back and create that 10-year plan. So again, the Transit Development Plan, we have alternatives, improvements, if you will, that we're going to recommend in 4 areas: the service area, infrastructure, technology, plans, and policies. And we're going to go through each of these tonight and talk through the recommended improvements for each of them. So I'm going to start with the service area. Oh, I forgot. First, just to give you an idea of how we're going to evaluate the alternatives that we're going to put forward. We're going to look at each of these alternatives and how they support the goals that we just talked about, those 7 big picture goals that included public safety, economic development, public trust, et cetera. So we're going to look at each of them and how they support those goals. We're going to look at them at their ability to generate ridership for the system. So, because ultimately that's what we want to do. We all want to have riders on our transit system. So we've been developing a model behind the scenes that will allow us to project ridership into the future. We're also going to look at the cost of each of these and the funding sources available. Sometimes funding sources are limited to certain types of investments. So we'll look at the availability of those funding sources. And right now there's a lot of new and kind of changing funding sources coming out of both the recovery from the COVID pandemic, but also the new federal administration. So we're seeing a lot of changes there. We'll also be looking at project phasing. You know, when we think about buying electric buses, we can't have the electric buses until we've actually invested in the charging stations. So we want to get the order of those projects correct. And then finally, what we're doing here tonight is we want to really base what we're talking about and think about evaluating the alternatives based on your input and understanding what the community wants, how they want to prioritize the investments within Tallahassee. So moving into the alternatives, again, we're going to start with the service alternatives. And after I get through the end of the service alternatives, there will be a part where we'll get you to do some polling. So we'll go through this first. The first one is to increase frequency. So instead of, say, having the bus come by a bus stop twice an hour, it might come by 4 times an hour. So it's giving you that higher level of service that would allow you to get to where you need to go in a faster, more efficient manner. So there's increased frequency is one option. Another option was to have later evening service. So the map on the right shows you the routes that currently operate in the evening. And so it's a little more limited than what you'll see throughout the whole daytime. And so we're looking at expanding services in the evening, creating later evening service. So that's another option. The next one is to increase Saturday service. So there's a lot more service on Saturday than in the evenings and on Sunday. But, you know, should we increase frequency or the number of routes on Saturday? That's another option that we heard folks talking about. Also Sunday service. Again, it's more limited on Sunday right now. So do we need more routes operating more frequently? And this can be very important to individuals who work in the retail or service industry where they need to get to work on Sunday. So we heard some comments about that. So we've kept that on the list to increase Sunday service. And then the final piece and option that we're looking at in terms of service is a more enhanced transit service between that downtown CK Steel Transit Center and Tallahassee Community College and everything in between. So connecting those two areas with a faster, more reliable, more direct service that you can really efficiently get people to and from and in between those two centers. So that's another option. We've heard that maybe getting a more enhanced service in that area would be beneficial. And again, serving all of those folks that were in that higher transit propensity area. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Courtney to do some polling.
All right. Well, everybody just heard a description of a number of alternatives to look at. So we want your feedback here. You have a poll question in front of you, and you can select 2. And we would like to know which of the 2 service improvements that you just heard about are most important. The options include increasing frequency, later evening service, increased Saturday service, increased Sunday service, and then the final option, enhanced transit service between TCC to CK Steel Plaza. So we are not quite at half of you. You can pick 2 and let us know which of these would be at the top of your list. Let's give it just 10 more seconds, Matt.
Sounds good.
Sometimes it's hard to only pick 2.
We really want your opinion, so be sure to vote.
All right, give it another couple seconds here. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll.
Great. All right. Well, obvious top contender there. Everybody selected increased frequency as one of their top service improvements, followed by later evening service. So thank you all. All right, Laura.
Yeah, and I think that was the same result from the morning as well. So good to know there's some consistency between our two sets of participants. So I'm now going to turn to infrastructure alternatives and think through how we might improve StarMetro's infrastructure. So the first option or alternative is to upgrade CK Steel. That's the transit center in downtown area, and just kind of modernizing it, improving it to make it more efficient for StarMetro, to make it more inviting to patrons. So that's one option. The next option is the proposed South City Transit Center. This doesn't exist today. The image on the right is a mock-up. This is just a draft. Nothing is final here, but it gives you an idea of what could be done on the site. And so the idea is to, at the northwest corner of South Meridian Road and Orange Avenue, is to have a transit center where a few, maybe about 5 routes could come in and you could transfer there instead of always having to go to CK Steel to transfer. So it would allow the Big Bend route, Gulf, Live Oak, Moss, and the Southside Flex to all come together, and you could do transfer there, and there would be an opportunity to have seating and some of amenities for patrons and riders as well. So there is that option as another in the infrastructure category. The next option is a little new to Tallahassee. We're calling it a mobility hub, and this is something you'll see in other cities, but you may not be as familiar with it here. The idea is to bring not only transit into an area, but also connections to a lot of different other modes. So there would be significant pedestrian access so that you could easily connect between the transit option and other uses via your feet. You could walk somewhere. There would be bike access, so you could maybe lock up your own personal bike in a safe place, or you could rent a bike share and take a bike and go somewhere. You may be able to connect with Uber and Lyft there if that's your desire. Maybe there would be a scooter share. There's all sorts of options for how all of these modes can come together in one area. And then there would also be some passenger amenities like a shelter or a place to sit down. So that's kind of a different concept for Tallahassee. And so we wanted to, in talking with staff, we thought it was a good idea to present. We feel like it's something that could be embraced here. So that's the mobility hub. And then next on the list, let's see here, are electric buses. We have heard a lot from the community stakeholders about interest in electrifying the fleets. So that is definitely on the list. And some of these may already be things that StarMetro has on its to-do list, like electrifying the buses, but we want to make sure that we're planning for it and continuing to keep that on the list as we move forward with the TDP. So that is another option on the infrastructure investment side. And then we have park and ride lots. These are usually found in the kind of outer areas, not in the downtown area, but kind of in the outer suburban areas where folks can drive to one location, park their vehicle, get on a transit vehicle, get on a bus, and get, to the rest of the city that way. So that is another option that we heard a few folks talk about, particularly in areas where maybe future development is coming. So park and ride lot is another option. And then there were a couple of different types of bus upgrades that we heard folks talk about, bus stop upgrades, sorry. So there's the kind of comfort amenities that come with bus stops that, it's not just a pole on the ground, but there's a shelter, a bus bench, maybe a trash can, some high visibility so that you can see the stop, the bus driver can see if folks are there. So all of those things that make the bus stop a more pleasant place to wait for the bus. So we did hear that folks are really interested in those sorts of upgrades. And if you remember back to our design your system conversation, this was the #1 thing that came up on that tool. And then there are other types of bus stop upgrades that really facilitate our mobility options for those folks who are using a wheelchair or perhaps a walker to move about. It's related to the Americans with Disabilities Act improvements, so that we don't just have, again, that pole in the ground, but we have some place where, you know, an individual can get to the stop via a sidewalk, you know, so paved pathway, and there's some place for the bus to deploy the lift that is used to put someone in a wheelchair on the vehicle. So those are another type of bus stop upgrade that we are considering as well. So I believe that is the last of our infrastructure. And so we'll do another poll related to those upgrades.
All right, so here's the test part. We'll see if everybody was taking notes from what Laura described here. We have a poll asking which of the 2 infrastructure improvements that you just heard about are most important to you. Which would be most impactful? You can select 2, and the options are upgrades to the CK Steel Plaza, the proposed South City Transit Center, mobility hubs, electric buses, park and ride lots, bus stop upgrades like benches, shelters, and reflective signs. And then a different version of that, bus stop upgrades for ADA improvements and accessibility. So votes are rolling in.
No clear winner yet, so keep voting.
Yeah. And I think when you subtract Laura and I and Kayla, we're almost there.
Maybe another 10 seconds or so.
Great. All right, we may have a clear winner though.
We might.
Yeah, here we go.
All right, so topping the list is actually bus stop upgrades like benches, shelters, and reflective signs. We do have a 2-way tie for second between electric buses and the second option for bus stop upgrades, ADA improvements. And then a nice spread along the other one. So, all right.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Okay, and now we're going to move into the final category of alternatives, and we combine the technology, planning, and policy alternatives into one group. And so this first one takes a little explaining. This is the transit signal priority, and sometimes called TSP, and this has to do with how the bus interacts with traffic signals. So you probably experienced an emergency vehicle approaching a traffic signal, and maybe the traffic signal changed to allow that vehicle to get through more efficiently. And so the emergency vehicles are doing something called transit signal preemption. They're overriding the transit signal by communicating between the vehicle and the signal in order to allow them to get through because it's an emergency. So transit signal priority is similar. It's the transit vehicle, the bus, is speaking to the traffic signal, but instead of overriding and preempting the signal, it's really just kind of a nuanced little change to the system. So if the bus is approaching and the traffic light is green, but about to turn red, the bus and the traffic signal will communicate. The traffic signal will realize the bus is approaching, and it will delay the change to red. It'll keep the green a little longer to allow the bus to get through. The reverse is true if it's red. If the light is red when the bus is sitting there, it may shorten the red cycle, so it'll turn to green a little more quickly to help that bus get through. And this is really helpful in other communities for making sure that the bus stays on schedule, that it is more reliable for passengers, and really helps them speed through a little faster to get to their ultimate destination, which can be very helpful to riders. So transit signal priority, hopefully that was clear about the traffic signals, but that's one of the options in this category. And I should note, there aren't a lot of technology options here because StarMetro has done so many technology upgrades lately that they've really marked a lot of things off of the list. So that's great. But that's why we kind of combine the technology planning and policy all together, because there weren't a lot of technology things on the list that StarMetro hadn't recently done. So moving from transit signal priority to the next one is adding audio announcements at CK Steel instead of just looking at a board and seeing when the bus is arriving and what bus bay you might need to go to. This would be to put them, announce them out loud so that folks would know where they need to go. And this would help all patrons, but also, those who may have visual impairments. It'll be easier for them to hear the announcement. So those are another type of technology upgrade that we're considering. And then the next one is a little more in the planning and policy sort of realm. And this is a bus ambassador travel trainer kind of program. And the idea here is that, if you're a first-time StarMetro user, it can be very difficult to know how to read the schedule, know where the bus stop is, know how to pay for the bus service when you get on the bus, know how to tell the driver where to stop to let you off. So all of that's a lot to learn. And so this program would help folks do that, train them, educate them on how to use the system. And we heard a lot about this, and there are different ways to do it in different systems, but we heard a lot about helping folks learn the system. So this is one way to do that. And so that is one alternative in this category. And then we also heard, again, a lot about helping folks understand and learn about the system. And so doing a marketing campaign, and those can be targeted, they can be broad in nature, but doing something to increase the visibility for StarMetro. And so there's a couple going on right now at StarMetro. You've got the Think Transit campaign, which is our project. So hopefully you've seen that logo before. You've got the Wearing a Mask campaign, so getting folks to wear a mask on transit. And then there's a few other just examples of other types of marketing campaigns from other systems on the screen. But that was another alternative that we came up with to address that visibility sort of education piece for the community. And so with that, the last and final option in this category is related to paratransit services. So paratransit services are those services that are geared toward individuals who are unable to use the regular bus. So whether there is a physical disability, a developmental disability, this allows them to have a vehicle come to right up to the curb, the door of their home, and take them where they need to go because they can't use the bus. And so with that service, it's a reservation-based service, and there are a limited number of vehicles that can do that. So in peak periods, when there's a large demand for services like that, sometimes we can't accommodate every request that comes in. And so the idea here was for this service to have kind of an overflow, a backup kind of idea where maybe StarMetro could contract with a taxi service or perhaps an Uber Lyft, something like that, to help accommodate those requests that come in that they just can't fill with their own vehicles. So kind of a safety valve for those services to ensure those individuals still have a way to get around, even if StarMetro vehicles are booked. So that was another option in this category. And the final one, so we'll turn it back over to the polling and get your all's thoughts.
All right, so question here, which two improvements are most important? What would be most impactful for you as a StarMetro rider or a future rider? A few options here, and you can pick up to two. Transit signal priority, audio announcements at CK Steel, the bus ambassador or travel trainer program, marketing campaigns, or that substitution or complement of the paratransit services. So it looks like just a couple more of you. Oh, it's bouncing around. I like the live polling. All right, Matt, I think we're good.
All right, here we go.
So top of the list there, transit signal priority selected by 5 of the 6 voters. And then we have a 3-way tie actually for next up, the audio announcements at CK Steel, the travel trainer program, and then the substitution or complement for the paratransit services. So there you go, Laura.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's voted and participated. As I said, we're going to take the responses tonight, combine them with the responses we had at our earlier meeting, and that'll help us as we move forward with the 10-year plan. So that's really very helpful to us. So kind of winding up with some ways to stay engaged with our process here. Again, the Design Your System tool is still on the website. It's starmetrothinktransit.com. It's going to close in a couple days on the 16th. So please, if you haven't done it, please do it. And if you know anyone you think would like to do it, please send it along. We'd love to get their feedback. If we can break 300 responses, we'd love it. There's also our webpage at talgov.com/thinktransit. You can always find more information there. You can go back and watch the first meeting. For those of you who weren't able to join us, it's posted there. You'll also be able to find this meeting posted. If someone else wasn't able to make it, they'll be able to find it there. Give us a day or two to get it up there, but it'll be there. And then finally, we are going to be presenting the plan to the City Commission on June 16th. That is a public meeting that anyone can join. So we invite you to join that meeting as well.